Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a monumental result, a stack of sources, and really get under the skin of what happened, how it happened, and, crucially, why it all matters.
And today we are diving into what has to be the most astonishing result of the Premier League campaign so far.
It really does. Wolverhampton Wanderers' decisive, utterly comprehensive 3-0 victory over West Ham United at Molineux.
Yeah, and this was a fixture that, just hours before kickoff, every pundit had it down as West Ham's easiest 3 points of the season. A nailed-on win to steady their ship.
A chance to pull clear of the drop zone.
Exactly, but instead it instantly became this huge psychological watershed moment for a Wolves side fighting for any kind of credibility.
And a catastrophic, potentially terminal crisis point for West Ham. The stakes from this one result are just enormous. This wasn't just losing 3 points. It was a devastating statement.
It says everything about the two clubs' internal health right now.
Absolutely. And our source stack for this deep dive really reflects that contrast. We've got the usual foundations, the match reports, BBC Sports' excellent summary, all the stats on XG, possession, distance covered.
The hard data.
But the real color, the real story, comes from the raw, unfiltered fan sentiment. We've been deep in the trenches, sifting through the Wolves and the West Ham subreddits.
So we're getting the absolute euphoria on one side.
And the crushing, almost apathetic despair on the other.
And that fan perspective is everything here. It tells you that the statistical side of things, it wasn't a fluke, it was felt on the ground, in the stands. We're looking at two fan bases who have both been suffering all season. But the reaction to this 3-0 as well, it's historic for both of them in very different ways.
So that brings us to the fundamental question, the mission of this deep dive. How on earth did a Wolves team, a side that was genuinely on pace to set an all-time Premier League low for points?
The Derby County record.
Exactly. How did they suddenly transform their identity, their application, their whole tactical structure to the point where one West Ham fan, just reeling in disbelief, said they made West Ham look like they were playing against Prime Barca?
That's a quote you just can't ignore, can you?
You really can't. That level of transformation is what we have to unpack.
Okay, let's get into it.
So let's start with the flash flood at Molineux. To really get the emotional shift for Wolves, you have to understand the context, the history, and just the ruthless speed of this victory.
The final score was 3-0, yes, but the key detail is this was Wolves' first league win of the season.
At the 20th attempt.
The 20th attempt, and that ends a colossal 23-game winless run in the league, stretching all the way back to last April.
Yeah.
That kind of psychological weight, it normally just crushes a club.
It grinds them down into submission, doesn't it?
Completely. So for Wolves to not just win, but to win 3-0 against a team that, many thought might be pushing for Europe, it just shows a staggering release of pressure.
The pressure on the manager, Rob Edwards, must have been immense.
Unbelievable, even though he's relatively new to the job.
And what really defines the game isn't just the result, it's the timing. All 3 goals, they arrived in the first half. They completely dismantled West Ham before the halftime whistle even blew.
It was a proper blitz. John Arias opened the scoring after just 4 minutes. A swift, right-footed finish with the assist from Eman-cipation.
And that early goal, that was the trigger, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. As the BBC report highlighted, the goal Arias of first for the club. It didn't just give them the lead. It just injected this furious belief into the whole stadium, the players, everyone.
It was a statement of intent. We're here to fight, not just to survive.
Precisely. And the second goal came about half an hour later, 31 minutes on the clock. And it spoke volumes about a change in application and attitude.
Yes, the penalty. The young lad, Mateus Mane, was judged to have been, well, the word used was clattered in the box by Sungaitu Magasa.
It was a stonewall penalty. No arguments. And Eman-cipation steps up, shows incredible composure.
Slots it straight down the middle, 2-0.
And then the third goal, that just cemented the humiliation for West Ham. At 41 minutes, the 18-year-old Mateus Mane, again, fires this powerful low drive from outside the box.
Beats Areola at his near post.
And that's not just the game sealed, it's Mandy's first ever senior goal. It creates this perfect hero narrative for the club right when they desperately needed one. That first half was just utterly ruthless, clinical.
It certainly was. But here's where it gets, for me, really interesting. We move beyond the scoreline and into the stats, the anomalies that really show the gulf between the teams, and the raw possession figures. They're the ultimate red herring, aren't they?
They absolutely are.
Yeah.
West Ham dominated the ball, 67.5% possession to Wolves' 32.5%. If you only saw that number, you'd assume West Ham were in control, maybe a bit unlucky.
Right.
But that possession was so sterile, it was horizontal, it was deeply, deeply ineffective. It tells us West Ham were holding the ball, but Wolves were dictating the space. They dictated the entire game without the ball.
Which speaks to the efficiency of Wolves' counterattack. They were happy to let them have it, but when they broke, they were just so dangerous and direct.
Spot on. And the expected goals, the XG, that confirms this lethal efficiency. The figures massively favored Wolves. 1.52 XG to West Ham's shocking 0.25.
0.25.
That's a number you'd expect from a team playing with 11 men behind the ball for the entire match, just trying to hold on. Wolves generated nearly 7 times the quality of threat.
It was just so clinical, which is,
Yeah,
well, it's the opposite of what we've seen from them all season.
exactly. The struggles just seem to evaporate.
And when you have that much possession, for West Ham, you'd expect them to at least, force the keeper into a few saves, have a few speculative shots.
You'd think so.
But this is the most damning indictment of West Ham's performance. Wolves registered 8 shots on target. West Ham registered a monumental and embarrassing 0.
0. That stat alone is it's the whole story. The fans on the subreddits latched onto it immediately. 0 shots on target against a team that hadn't kept a clean sheet all season.
Jose Sa in the Wolves goal could have had a cup of tea.
He had nothing to do. Meanwhile, Areola at the other end made 5 saves. It just shows you where all the pressure was. West Ham weren't just poor going forward. They were fundamentally incapable of breaking down a Wolves defense that, before this match, looked like he had forgotten how to defend.
It also speaks to the psychological difference on the day, doesn't it? The sheer effort, which is something you can't really hide, even with possession stats.
And the distance-covered stats are startling. They back that up completely. Wolves covered significantly more ground. They ran 114.84 kilometers compared to West Ham's 108.17.
So that's almost a 6% increase in sheer application.
And that's not just running for the sake of it. That figure reflects tactical discipline, aggressive pressing, players busting a gut to make recovery runs. The Wolves fans explicitly noted it. One of them praised Arias for sprinting 50 yards to make a crucial tackle in the second half, long after the game was won.
That's the hunger. That was the engine of this victory.
It was. And finally, the defensive context for Wolves. This result secured their first clean sheet of the entire season, breaking a really concerning streak.
Yeah, the BBC report had flagged that they were heading towards a pretty unfortunate piece of history.
They were. Only 4 teams in English top-flight history have ever gone longer without a clean sheet from the start of a campaign. So to snap that streak, and to do it by keeping the opposition completely quiet with 0 shots on target, it's a complete reversal of their defensive mentality.
It turns that entire narrative about their defensive frailty completely on its head.
In just 90 minutes.
So the stats are damning for West Ham, but they only really tell us what happened. To understand how Wolves pulled this off, we have to look behind the curtain at what Rob Edwards actually changed. Let's talk about this tactical rebirth, because this wasn't luck. This was a deep structural adjustment.
It was a management masterstroke. And even if, as some of the analysts are pointing out, some of the changes were initially forced by injuries.
A JRB being out.
Exactly.
Look.
But Edwards deserves full credit for using those absences to implement some really disruptive ideas.
And the cornerstone of this rebirth, it has to be the 18-year-old Mateus Mane. We mentioned his goal and winning the penalty, but his all-around performance was just pivotal. He got a massive 8.51 player rater score.
Pundits, fans in the ground, they were calling him a god. And the collective relief and excitement from the Wolves fans was overwhelming. One fan's reaction just summed it all up.
How on earth was Mane not getting minutes previously?
He suggests Edwards might have missed a trick earlier, or maybe the old system just didn't suit him, perhaps. But the fact, another fan instantly coined the nickname Eman-cipation. That just shows you the transformative nature of his performance. He really embodied that feeling that Wolves were finally unshackled.
Absolutely. And the structural changes made that Eman-cipation possible. The central tactical tweak that everyone's praising is the deliberate decision to break up the usual central midfield duo.
Gomes-Andre.
Right. And the more analytical fans in the Wolves community were quite critical of that partnership, weren't they? Saying they were too similar.
Precisely. The critique was that they were basically the same player. Both are phenomenal ball winners, great disruptors, but neither is a natural progressive creator. Neither is a deep-lying orchestrator.
So if you play them together in a two-man midfield, you fundamentally lack that link between the defense and the attack.
You do. You become too reliant on your wingbacks for width and your forwards to just conjure up some magic. So Edwards addressed this head-on. Andre actually came on for Gomes at halftime, which signals that only one of them was needed. The other spot needed a playmaker.
So the new creative structure was key, shifting to two playmakers alongside a single defensive central midfielder. What were the risks of that, though? Especially against a team like West Ham that wants the ball.
Well, the risk, and the fans correctly identified this, was that it made the team extremely lightweight in terms of tackling in the middle of the park. You're sacrificing that brute force for creativity.
But the payoff was huge.
Immense. They became, and this is a quote, very lethal when we break forward. Mane and Arias are the direct beneficiaries. They're positioned higher up. They're given license to roam. And Edwards mitigated that defensive risk by demanding that massive work rate we talked about.
The distance-covered stats.
Exactly. And by relying on the wider center backs to be aggressive and cover the space.
Let's get into those specific attacking dynamics then. The deep dive nuggets that the sort of youth football video analysts among the fans were raving about, they focused heavily on these specific triangles that just created chaos.
Yeah, and the primary area of concern for West Ham and the source of Wolves' greatest threat was that left-sided triangle. This involved Hugo Breno at left wing back, Mateus Mane playing as a left center midfielder, almost a number 10 shoehorned into that deeper role, and Hwang Hee-chan as a left forward.
That grouping just sounds so fluid, which must be a nightmare for a structured defense to track.
It was described perfectly as unpredictable as it was brilliant. The key was the movement, the dovetailing runs. Bueno provides the overlapping width, Mane operates in that half space driving forward, and Hwang drifts away from the center backs to link the play.
So when West Ham's fullback gets dragged out by Bueno,
It creates huge channels for Mane to exploit, or for Hwang to cut back onto his stronger foot. This fluid, rapid transition on that left flank just became a devastating weapon. They turned defense into attack in a heartbeat.
and the dynamic up front also shifted, didn't it? They moved away from a static single striker.
Yeah, that was another brilliant little tweak. They used Tulu Arokudere as the center forward, the big option, good at holding up play, winning headers, and paired him with Hwang, who is smaller, quicker, and free to drift.
The classic big man, little man partnership.
Basically, yeah. And it had shown glimpses of promise even in the draw against Man United, but here it really clicked.
So how did that central pairing then affect the other side of the pitch, the right wing back in particular?
Crucially, playing Tulu as that narrow center forward and having Hwang drift about meant the main central defenders were constantly occupied. This allowed their right wing back, Jackson Chatua, to bomb forward really effectively when Arias drifted across from midfield.
So it created a much more balanced attack across the whole front line. Not so predictable.
Far from it. Chitua's runs were often found with a quick ball over the top, and it just fixed an issue where previously that right side of the attack often looked really isolated.
It's astonishing, really, how a few personnel tweaks and structural shifts, even if they were initially forced by injury, can just unlock so much potential.
And we have to reiterate that this structural change, which introduced more creative players, somehow simultaneously made the defense more solid, which is completely counterintuitive.
That is the ultimate key takeaway from the fan analysis. The new structure fundamentally changed the defensive responsibilities, but it improved the outcome. By freeing up the midfielders to focus on attacking, it meant the outside center backs in the back three.
Players like Krejci and Mascara.
Exactly. They had to do a lot of the running and covering.
So if Mane or Arias commits to going forward, the outside center backs have to basically act as quasi-fullbacks, tracking wide runners and covering for the wingbacks pushing on.
Precisely. They were forced to be proactive, mobile defenders rather than static positional ones. And the fans believe this made the team inherently harder to play against because they were more compact and disciplined in recovery.
And it worked against Liverpool, it worked against Man United, and now, fatally for West Ham, it worked against them.
The high work rate, even from those creative players, was just non-negotiable for the system to function. Right. Let's move to the emotional heart of this deep dive, the tale of two fan bases. Because the psychological difference between Molineux and the West Ham faithful could not be more stark. Let's start with Wolves' just unbridled joy.
Oh, after months of existential misery, they're absolutely soaking this up, and rightly so.
It's the biggest outpouring of relief and genuine footballing happiness we've seen from a struggling club all season. We've got quotes that are just pure, immediate adrenaline, woof, woof, and proclaiming the match was absolute cinema.
And they're already getting carried away. Noting that they're now undefeated in 26, they feel their club is suddenly massive again.
The numerical significance adds to it as well, doubling their points tally for the entire season in one afternoon, going from 3 to 6, which immediately prompted the predictable but wonderful "we are staying up."
Uh, and league title, here we come, followed by Derby fans shaking in their boots at the moment.
And that Derby reference, of course, that is the crucial context for the more realistic Wolves fans. While they are embracing the euphoria, they do understand the gravity of their situation.
Oh yeah, even in the joy, there's a welcome dose of realism. Survival is still a tall task, as one supporter put it, but the ambition has shifted from just, surviving to avoiding historical shame.
The goal now is to make this a proper relegation fight.
And vitally, to beat Derby County's infamous Premier League record low of 11 points. Avoiding that historical footnote is now an achievable, realistic target that gives them focus for the rest of the season.
And the manager is completely backed. For this week, at least. After months of frustration, one fan, Tarnyarme, just asked, "Where are the Edwards haters now, Mao? The whole atmosphere has changed."
They're looking forward to the next match. For the first time all season, watching Match of the Day will be a pleasure, not a penance.
Now, let's pivot to West Ham. Because the mood there, it's not just fury, is it? It's a crushing historical apathy, which is a far more dangerous psychological state for a football club.
Absolutely. The Hammers fans describe this as the most humiliating loss and a shambolic performance. But the overall feeling was resignation. One fan said, "I'm not even pissed off, I just don't care anymore."
That apathy is terrifying. Fury suggests passion, a demand for change. Apathy suggests the fans think the problems are so deep they've just lost the will to care.
And the context of who they lost to just compounds it. One fan confessed, "I can't remember a more humiliating loss in all the time I've watched the Premier League. Wolves were on pace to destroy the record for fewest points, and we made them look like Prime Barca."
Another one, just thinking of the journey and the expense, said he felt sorry for our away fans. The fact they delivered that performance against the easiest opponent in the league just left them feeling completely exposed.
And the criticism immediately fell on the manager, Nuno Espirito Santo. The narrative around him is just brutal, focusing not just on the performance, but on his decisions and his attitude.
The tactical critique was savage. Being 3-0 down at halftime, you need a radical attacking response. Instead, Nuno makes 2 defensive changes. He brings on a holding midfielder in Tomas Soucek and a fullback in Ezra Mayers,
Which the fans immediately saw as cowardly. It wasn't a genuine attempt to chase the game, it was a signal of surrender.
And that lack of attacking intent was mirrored in the 0 shots on target we talked about. Fan critiques said Nuno's style has reverted to this sort of Potter-level attacking inertia. 6 total emblems against the team at the bottom. When you're chasing the game, that's just inexcusable.
And Nuno's perceived lack of professionalism after the final whistle just amplified the crisis. Commentators and fans all noted he didn't shake Rob Edwards' hand. He just walked straight down the tunnel.
Fans called it shocking, unacceptable, and a pathetic display. That action, more than anything, suggests a manager who has completely lost control and belief. One fan speculated he looked like a man walking out on the job.
The players didn't escape the firing line either, and the captain, Jared Bowen, was singled out. The criticism wasn't just about his performance, it was his body language, his lack of leadership.
Some fans went as far as suggesting he should be dropped, or even sold in January while his value is still high because he's not influencing anything on the pitch.
And when morale is that low, you need your captain to step up, and the feeling was that Bowen completely failed to do that.
The defense was also utterly savaged, Max Kilman in particular. He was called an absolute disgrace, especially after being turned inside out by Wolves' quick movement.
Which led one fan to angrily question his supposed £40 million valuation. Mavropanos was also criticized for poor positioning, especially for that first goal. It's clearly a team that's lost its defensive spine.
But maybe the most sobering quote, capturing that sense of dread, came from a West Ham fan who tried to temper the Wolves celebrations with a harsh dose of reality.
The memento mori quote.
Exactly. He warned them. It was West Ham, take the points and don't think about the game. That's all. Don't do it to yourselves.
And that's such a powerful line. It's the ultimate insult to Wolves, basically saying, your win is meaningless because we're that incompetent.
But it's also the ultimate self-damning statement for West Ham, admitting their condition is so dire that beating them is no real metric of quality.
It speaks volumes about the institutional resignation. When your own fans warn the opposition not to celebrate because you're that bad, you know the club is in deep, deep trouble.
That brings us perfectly into our final section, the wider implications. Because this result dramatically shifts the focus of the relegation battle. It injects hope at the very bottom, while creating an immediate crushing fixture crisis just above the drop zone.
So what does this all mean for Wolves' position? They're still rock bottom, 20th, but they're now on 6 points. They've doubled their total.
They're now 6 points behind 19th place Burnley, who are on 12, and 12 points behind Nottingham Forest in 17th, who are on 18 points.
So the significance here isn't immediate safety. As a lot of Wolves fans have acknowledged, safety is still as good as out of reach. But they've avoided those historically worst records for this stage of the season, and by showing that fight and quality, they've created the potential for a dramatic second-half surge.
The key word there is momentum. They finally have a foundation to build on. Their next challenge is an away trip to Everton on Wednesday. If they can replicate that defensive discipline and work rate, they might be able to steal another point or two.
And really begin to make this a proper fight for survival.
On the flip side, West Ham's crisis is just deepening, and they've failed to capitalize on opportunities. Their defeat was made even worse by the fact Nottingham Forest lost at the same time 3-1 to Aston Villa.
So had West Ham won, they'd be 1 point closer to safety. Instead, they're still 18th, still 4 points adrift, still on 14 points.
And the immediate reaction suggests their confidence is just completely shattered. One fan noted they just played their easiest 3-game run fixtures against Burnley, Sheffield United, and Wolves, and they've picked up 1 point.
1 point from 9.
Yeah.
That just cements the pessimism that they are structurally incapable of winning the so-called easy games.
Which brings us to the crucial fixture in just a few days' time. West Ham welcome Nottingham Forest to the London Stadium on Tuesday. Given the table, this has now escalated from an important 6-pointer to an absolutely essential, humongous match for their survival.
And the fans' sentiment around this is almost fatalistic. They see it as a non-negotiable must-win. But given the performance against Wolves, many believe a loss is the more likely outcome.
One fan worried, "Nothing I've seen in the last 3 games says we'll actually make the most of that chance. The far more likely outcome is that we lose to Forest."
And if they do lose, the gap widens to 7 points, and that sense of inevitability really starts to set in.
And the pressure is now at breaking point for Nuno. While fans are calling for a root and branch restructuring, blaming the board, David Sullivan specifically, for systemic failures and poor signings, Nuno is the only immediate fixable problem.
The general feeling is that the problem is systemic, yes, but the manager is the necessary sacrifice to inject any hope or change the trajectory before it's too late. Speculation is rife that he could be sacked before that Forest game.
The board faces an immense decision, don't they? Sack him now or stick with him for the game that could be the final nail in the coffin.
And we just have to emphasize the specific head-to-head pain for West Ham here. Wolves have now beaten them twice this season,
Once in the League Cup back in August, 3-2, and now 3-0 in the league.
which is perhaps the ultimate humiliation, as one West Ham fan painfully noted. Wolves' 2 league wins this whole season have both come against West Ham United,
They've acted as the perennial confidence boosters for the league's bottom side.
compounding their own crisis with undeniable statistical evidence of just how poor their preparation and application has been.
Right, let's try and summarize the key takeaways from this extraordinary clash. This was a story defined by contrasting mentalities, contrasting tactics. It proves that sometimes desperation can be a much more powerful motivator than expectation.
For Wolves, it was Rob Edwards' tactical bravery. Breaking up that Gomes-Andre pairing, getting Mateus Mane into that dynamic left-sided triangle, and demanding that explosive work rate, it unlocked a direct, lethal counterattacking threat that West Ham just couldn't handle.
They maximized their 32% possession to generate 1.52 xG and 8 shots on target. It was ruthless and it was efficient.
Conversely, for West Ham, it was just a display of pure apathy. 0 shots on target, a complete lack of structure.
Yeah.
And that was compounded by what the fans saw as cowardly management from Nuno.
Epitomized by those defensive changes at 3-0 down and his visible lack of professionalism post-match, walking straight down the tunnel. The failure of leadership from the captain Jared Bowen downwards was a major focus of the fan fury.
So the result has infused Wolves with genuine, if still remote, hope of avoiding the record books and mounting a proper fight. Meanwhile, West Ham, who are only 4 points from safety, have seen their confidence utterly shattered just before a critical run of fixtures.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you, building directly on that next crucial match. West Ham versus Nottingham Forest on Tuesday. Given West Ham's demonstrated systemic failure and Nuno's cowardly display, is sacking him before Tuesday the easiest decision for the board to make, just to inject some urgency?
Or is it actually the riskiest move? Could it cause even greater destabilization right before that must-win game? If they lose to Forest, the gap becomes 7 points. Relegation becomes almost a mathematical certainty before the January window can even open to reinforce what fans are calling a disgraceful bench.
So the question is, can Wolves' new momentum genuinely drag a third team, like West Ham, down into that bottom three conversation? Or is West Ham's failure so deep-rooted that they should already be focusing on securing a manager for a championship rebuild?
That truly is the monumental question facing David Sullivan and the West Ham board right now. A lot rests on Tuesday night.
And the response they make to this humiliation, it will define their season.
One way or another.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the footballing drama that redefined the bottom of the Premier League table. We'll catch you next time.